Welcome to a story that will challenge everything you think you know about small-town America, and the night the impossible became undeniably real. Close your eyes, and let me take you back to November 2nd, 1957, when the quiet farming community of Levelland, Texas became the epicenter of one of the most documented and terrifying UFO encounters in American history. This isn't science fiction. This isn't folklore. This is the true account of how 15 separate witnesses, most of them complete strangers to each other, all reported the exact same impossible phenomenon within the span of just 2 hours, and how that single night changed their lives, their town, and their understanding of reality forever. The first call came in at 11:04 p.m. to the Levelland Police Department. Sheriff Clem was just finishing his coffee when the phone rang, cutting through the quiet November evening like a knife. On the other end was Pedro Saucedo, a field worker whose voice was shaking so badly that Clem had to ask him to repeat himself 3 times. Pedro was calling from a payphone at the Withero gas station, 17 miles west of Levelland, and what he was saying didn't make any sense. He claimed that he and his friend Joe Salaz had been driving along Farm Road 116 when a torpedo-shaped object, glowing like molten metal, had suddenly appeared ahead of their pickup truck. The engine died instantly. The headlights went out. The radio went silent. And then this craft that Pedro estimated was about 200 feet long, rose up from the road and disappeared into the night sky with a roar like thunder. Sheriff Clem sighed and made a note in his logbook. Probably drunk, he thought. Pedro had seemed coherent enough, but it was Saturday night, and strange calls weren't unusual. He'd send a patrol car out to check on them in the morning. But 13 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time it was Jim Wheeler, a local rancher whose family had lived in Hockley County for 3 generations. Wheeler was calling from his farmhouse north of town, and his voice carried the steady authority of a man who'd seen everything the Texas plains could throw at him. But tonight, something had thrown him completely off balance. Wheeler reported that his truck had stalled on the highway near his property when a bright, oval object passed overhead. The engine wouldn't restart until the object was completely out of sight. When it was gone, the truck started immediately, as if nothing had ever been wrong. Sheriff Clem put down the phone and stared at his logbook. 2 separate calls, 17 miles apart, within 15 minutes of each other. Both reporting engine failure in the presence of unknown objects. Both men known in the community as reliable, hard-working, and not given a flights of fancy. This was beginning to feel like more than coincidence. He was still processing this when the phone rang a 3rd time. It was 11:30 p.m., and this call would remove any doubt that something extraordinary was happening in Hockley County that night. The caller was Jose Alvarez, a truck driver hauling grain from Lubbock to Amarillo. Alvarez was stopped on Highway 54, about 4 miles east of Levelland, and he was calling from Carl's truck stop with a story that made Clem's blood run cold. Alvarez described seeing a bright egg-shaped object sitting in the middle of the highway ahead of him. As he approached, his diesel engine began to sputter and then died completely. His headlights dimmed to nothing. Even his flashlight, sitting on the dashboard, went dead. The object pulsed with an intense white light that hurt his eyes to look at directly. After several minutes, it lifted off the road and accelerated away at impossible speed. The moment it disappeared, every electrical system in his truck came back to life. By now, Sheriff Clem was no longer thinking about drunk drivers or practical jokes. 3 separate witnesses, 3 different locations, all within a 30-minute window, all reporting the same phenomenon. Engine failure, electrical systems going dead, and unknown objects in the sky. He grabbed his hat and keys, deciding it was time to see for himself what was happening out there. But before he could reach the door, the phone rang again, and again, and again. The calls kept coming throughout the night, each one adding another piece to an increasingly impossible puzzle. At 11:45 p.m., Ronald Martin, a local college student driving home from a date, reported his car stalling near the intersection of Farm Road 597 and Highway 114. He described a glowing object that looked like a giant football hovering about 20 feet above the road. When he tried to restart his car, nothing happened. No click, no sound, complete electrical failure. The object remained motionless for what felt like an eternity before shooting straight up and vanishing. His car started on the first try after it was gone. At midnight, Frank Williams called from a farmhouse 12 miles northwest of town. Williams, a World War II veteran and respected member of the community, reported that he'd been checking on his cattle when a brilliant light appeared over his pasture. His truck, which had been running perfectly moments before, suddenly died. The light was so intense that it illuminated his entire property as bright as day. He could see every detail of his barn, his fences, even individual fence posts a quarter-mile away. The light remained for nearly 5 minutes before rising into the sky and disappearing toward the southwest. His truck started immediately afterward. Sheriff Clem had stopped writing in his logbook. Instead, he was now plotting the locations on a county map, and what he saw made his hands shake. The sightings formed a rough circle around Levelland, each incident approximately 10 to 15 miles from the town center. Whatever was happening wasn't random. There was a pattern here, a systematic quality that suggested intelligence and purpose. But the most unsettling detail was the consistency of the reports. Every witness described the same sequence of events: approach of the object, complete electrical failure, prolonged observation period, departure of the object, immediate restoration of electrical function. No variations, no contradictions, just the same impossible story told by different people who had never met each other. At 12:15 a.m., the pattern broke in the most terrifying way possible. The call came from Larry Hatfield, and unlike the previous witnesses, Larry wasn't calling from a payphone or a farmhouse. He was calling from his car, parked on the shoulder of Highway 385, just 3 miles south of Levelland. The object was still there, still visible, and it was moving slowly toward town. Larry's voice was barely a whisper as he described a cigar-shaped craft, approximately 200 feet long, glowing with a soft blue-white light that pulsed. Like a heartbeat, it was flying at treetop level, maybe 100 feet off the ground, moving at about 30 miles per hour straight toward the center of Levelland. Sheriff Clem grabbed his radio and called his deputy, Pat McCulloch, who was patrolling the east side of town. McCulloch confirmed that he could see a bright light approaching from the south, moving in a straight line about a mile away. Both men watched from their respective positions as the object passed directly over the center of Levelland, flying so low that Clem later swore he could make out surface details on its hull. The craft was perfectly silent, leaving no exhaust trail, no sound, no disturbance in the air. It simply glided over the sleeping town like a ghost ship sailing through calm seas. But here's where the story takes an even stranger turn. As the object passed over Levelland's main electrical substation, something unprecedented happened. Every streetlight in town flickered and dimmed. The courthouse clock stopped. The traffic signals went dark. For exactly 37 seconds, measured by McCulloch's stopwatch, the entire town of Levelland experienced a partial electrical blackout. When the object cleared the town limits and disappeared toward the northeast, the lights came back on. The clock resumed ticking, and the traffic signals returned to their normal cycle. The power company would later find no mechanical explanation for the outage. All equipment was functioning normally. All connections were secure. According to their instruments, the blackout had never happened. By 1 a.m., Sheriff Clem's office looked like a war room. The logbook was full. The county map was covered with red pins marking sighting locations, and the phone showed no signs of stopping. Deputy McCulloch had returned from his patrol with a story that would haunt him for the rest of his life. While following the object's path northeast of town, he'd encountered it hovering motionless over the intersection of Highway 385 and Farm Road 1585. McCulloch parked his patrol car about 200 yards away and observed the craft through binoculars for nearly 10 minutes. He described it as egg-shaped, about 150 feet long and 50 feet wide, with a smooth metallic surface that reflected starlight. The object pulsed with internal light, growing brighter and dimmer in a regular rhythm that seemed almost like breathing. What happened next would become the most documented part of the entire incident. McCulloch decided to approach the object for a closer look. He started his engine, put the car in drive, and began moving slowly toward the intersection. As he got within 100 yards, his engine began to miss and sputter. At 75 yards, his headlights dimmed noticeably. At 50 yards, the engine died completely and all electrical systems shut down. The patrol car coasted to a stop in the middle of the highway, leaving McCulloch sitting alone in the dark, staring at something that shouldn't exist. The object seemed to notice him. It began to pulse more rapidly, and a section of its hull that had been dark suddenly lit up with a soft, amber glow. McCulloch later described feeling as though he was being scanned, examined, studied like a specimen under a microscope. The sensation lasted for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Then, without warning, the object rose straight up at tremendous speed, accelerating from 0 to invisible in less than 2 seconds. There was no sound, no blast of air, no indication of the tremendous forces that such acceleration would require. It simply vanished into the star-filled sky as if it had never been there at all. McCulloch sat in his dead patrol car for several minutes, trying to process what he'd just experienced. When he finally turned the ignition key, the engine started immediately. All electrical systems functioned normally. The radio crackled to life, and he heard Sheriff Clem's voice calling for his status report. McCulloch keyed the microphone and said simply, "I saw it, I saw the damn thing up close, and I don't know what it was, but it wasn't anything from around here." The final call of the night came at 1:30 a.m. from Newell Wright, a cotton farmer whose property bordered the town limits. Wright reported that a large, glowing object had landed in his field, about half a mile from his farmhouse. Unlike the other witnesses, Wright claimed to have gotten within 50 yards of the object on foot. He described it as oval-shaped, resting on the ground like a giant metallic egg. The surface was smooth and featureless, with no visible doors, windows, or propulsion systems. It glowed with the same soft, pulsing light that other witnesses had described, but up close, Wright could see that the light seemed to come from within the object itself, as if the entire hull was translucent. Wright watched the object for nearly 20 minutes, working up the courage to get closer. But as he began to approach, something stopped him. Not fear, exactly, but a powerful sense that he shouldn't interfere, that he was observing something far beyond his understanding. The object seemed to be resting, recharging, or perhaps studying its surroundings. Wright noticed that the grass around the craft had been flattened in a perfect circle, and that his cattle, normally curious about anything new in their pasture, were staying as far away as possible, huddled together at the opposite end of the field. After 20 minutes, the object began to glow more brightly. It rose slowly from the ground, hovering about 10 feet above the flattened grass for a moment before accelerating upward and disappearing into the night sky. Wright ran back to his farmhouse and called the sheriff immediately. When investigators visited his property the next morning, they found a circular impression in the grass exactly as he had described it. The affected area measured 40 feet in diameter, and the grass within the circle remained flattened for several weeks afterward, despite normal weather and Wright's attempts to restore it. By 2 a.m., the incident was over. The phones had stopped ringing, the sky was clear, and Levelland had returned to its normal Saturday night quiet. But Sheriff Clem knew that nothing would ever be normal again. In less than 3 hours, 15 separate witnesses had reported identical encounters with unknown objects displaying technology far beyond anything in human capability. These weren't teenagers looking for attention or drunk drivers with overactive imaginations. These were farmers, ranchers, truck drivers, and working people whose livelihoods depended on understanding machines, weather, and the practical realities of life on the Texas plains. As dawn broke over Hockley County on November 3rd, 1957, Sheriff Clem sat in his office staring at the logbook that would soon become one of the most important documents in UFO history. 15 witnesses, 9 separate locations, identical descriptions of objects and effects. Complete electrical failure followed by immediate restoration. Objects displaying flight characteristics impossible for any known aircraft. And most disturbing of all, a clear pattern suggesting that whatever had visited Levelland that night had done so with purpose and intelligence. The story should have ended there, filed away as an unexplained incident in a small Texas town. But what happened next would transform the Levelland UFO wave from a local mystery into a national controversy that would echo through the halls of the Pentagon, capture the attention of scientists and skeptics worldwide, and forever change the lives of everyone who witnessed the impossible on that November night in 1957. The sun hadn't even cleared the horizon when the first reporter arrived in Levelland. Word of the previous night's events had somehow leaked beyond Hockley County, and by 8 a.m. on November 3rd, Sheriff Clem's quiet office had transformed into a media circus. The phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn, with calls coming in from newspapers in Dallas, Houston, and as far away as Chicago. How the story had spread so quickly remained a mystery that would never be solved. But someone, somewhere, had decided that what happened in Levelland was news worth sharing with the world. Bob Wilson from the Lubbock Avalanche Journal was the first to arrive, followed closely by a stringer from the Associated Press who'd driven down from Amarillo. These weren't small-town reporters looking for a human interest story. These were seasoned journalists who'd covered everything from oil booms to political scandals, and they were taking the Levelland incident seriously. Wilson spent nearly 2 hours interviewing Sheriff Clem, going through the logbook entry by entry, checking times, locations, and witness statements with the methodical precision of a detective building a case for court. What impressed Wilson most wasn't just the consistency of the reports, but the quality of the witnesses. Pedro Saucedo might have been dismissed as unreliable if he'd been the only one, but when his story was corroborated by Jim Wheeler, a man whose word was considered gold in 3 counties, the narrative took on a different weight entirely. Wheeler had served 2 terms on the county commission, was a deacon at the First Baptist Church, and had never been known to tell a lie or exaggerate a story in his 63 years of life. If Jim Wheeler said he saw something impossible in the sky, then something impossible had been in the sky. By noon, the second wave of investigators had arrived, and these weren't journalists. 3 men in dark suits and government plates had driven down from Reese Air Force Base near Lubbock, identifying themselves as representatives of Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official UFO investigation program. The lead investigator, Major Donald Kehoe, was a career officer with 15 years of experience in what the military euphemistically called unusual aerial phenomena. Kehoe had investigated over 200 UFO reports across the Southwest, and he'd developed a reputation for thorough, skeptical analysis that usually resulted in conventional explanations. Weather balloons, aircraft misidentifications, atmospheric inversions, these were the tools of his trade, and he'd used them to explain away 90% of the cases that crossed his desk. But the Levelland incident was different from anything Kehoe had encountered before. The sheer number of witnesses, the consistency of their reports, and the electromagnetic effects described by every single observer created a pattern that resisted easy explanation. Kehoe's standard approach was to interview witnesses separately, looking for contradictions and inconsistencies that would reveal the human tendency to embellish or misremember unusual events. But after spending the entire afternoon talking to Pedro Saucedo, Jim Wheeler, Jose Alvarez, and Deputy Pat McCulloch, he found himself facing an uncomfortable truth. Their stories matched in every significant detail. The electromagnetic effects were particularly troubling. Kehoe had dealt with reports of car engines stalling during UFO sightings before, but those cases usually involved single witnesses whose claims couldn't be verified. Here, he had 15 separate incidents of complete electrical failure, each one perfectly timed to the presence of the observed objects, each one completely reversible once the objects departed. He'd brought electromagnetic detection equipment from Reese Air Force Base, hoping to find residual evidence of unusual energy fields, but the readings were frustratingly normal. Whatever had caused the electrical failures had left no trace behind. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Kehoe decided to visit Newell Wright's cotton field, where the final sighting had occurred. Wright led the Air Force team to the spot where he claimed the object had landed, and what they found there challenged everything Kehoe thought he knew about UFO reports. The circular impression in the grass was exactly as Wright had described it, 40 feet in diameter, perfectly round, with every blade of grass flattened in the same direction as if pressed down by tremendous, evenly distributed weight. Soil samples taken from inside the circle showed compression patterns consistent with heavy machinery, but there were no tire tracks, no equipment marks, no indication of how such weight could have been applied so evenly across such a large area. More disturbing was what they found when they tested the soil with a Geiger counter. The entire circular area showed elevated radiation levels, roughly 3 times higher than the surrounding field. The radiation wasn't dangerous, but it was measurable, consistent, and completely unexplained. Kehoe had investigated landing sites before, but he'd never encountered verifiable physical evidence like this. The combination of witness testimony, electromagnetic effects, and physical trace evidence created a case that couldn't be easily dismissed or explained away. While the Air Force team worked in Wright's field, the media attention was creating its own set of problems. By evening, reporters from major newspapers and television networks had descended on Levelland like locusts, turning the quiet farming community into a three-ring circus. The town's single hotel was booked solid, the cafe ran out of food twice, and Main Street was clogged with cars, bearing license plates from Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Kansas. Everyone wanted to interview the witnesses, and most of the witnesses were beginning to regret ever making those phone calls to Sheriff Clem. Pedro Saucedo, who'd made the first report, found himself besieged by reporters at his small house on the outskirts of town. Saucedo was a quiet man who worked hard, minded his own business, and had never wanted any kind of public attention. Now, he had news crews camped in his front yard, asking him to recreate his experience for television cameras, offering him money for exclusive interviews, and generally turning his life upside down. By the third day, Saucedo had stopped answering his door and was seriously considering packing up his family and moving to another county. Jim Wheeler faced a different kind of pressure. As one of the most respected men in the community, his endorsement of the UFO story carried enormous weight, and various groups were eager to claim his support for their particular theories. UFO enthusiasts wanted him to appear at conferences and lectures. Skeptics wanted him to recant his story and admit he'd been mistaken. Religious groups wanted him to interpret his experience as either divine intervention or demonic deception, depending on their particular theological bent. Wheeler, who'd never asked for any of this attention, simply wanted to return to the quiet life of cattle ranching that had suited him perfectly well for 6 decades. The most disturbing response came from Deputy Pat McCulloch's own colleagues in law enforcement. McCulloch had been a respected member of the Sheriff's Department for 8 years, with a reputation for level-headed professionalism and accurate reporting. But his detailed account of observing the object at close range had made him a target for ridicule and suspicion among other officers in the region. Some questioned his mental stability. Others suggested he'd been drinking on duty. A few implied that he'd fabricated the entire story for attention or personal gain. The whisper campaign against McCulloch was vicious and persistent, and it would eventually force him to leave law enforcement entirely. Sheriff Clem found himself caught in the middle of a situation he'd never imagined possible. His small department was overwhelmed by the media attention, the Air Force investigation, and the constant stream of curiosity seekers who'd begun making pilgrimages to Levelland to see the site of the famous UFO encounters. Property owners were complaining about trespassers. Local businesses were being disrupted by the crowds. The county commissioners were getting pressure from both sides. UFO believers who wanted the area designated as a historical site, and skeptics who wanted the whole thing forgotten as quickly as possible. But the most serious problem was what the incident was doing to the witnesses themselves. These were ordinary people who'd experienced something extraordinary, and they were paying a price for their honesty that none of them had anticipated. Pedro Saucedo lost his job when his employer decided that having a UFO witness on the payroll was bad for business. Jose Alvarez found himself blacklisted by several trucking companies who didn't want drivers who saw things hauling their freight. Ronald Martin, the college student, was subjected to such relentless teasing at school that he eventually transferred to another university. The pattern was becoming clear. In 1957 America, reporting a UFO sighting was social and economic suicide. The witnesses hadn't just seen something impossible. They'd violated an unspoken rule about what kinds of experiences were acceptable to discuss in public. They'd crossed a line that society had drawn around the boundaries of normal reality, and they were being punished for their transgression. 3 weeks after the incident, Major Kehoe submitted his preliminary report to Project Blue Book headquarters at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. The report was unlike anything he'd ever written. After examining all the evidence, interviewing all the witnesses, and exploring every possible conventional explanation, Kehoe was forced to conclude that the Levelland incident represented a genuine encounter with objects of unknown origin displaying technology far beyond current human capabilities. He recommended that the case be classified as unknown and that further investigation be conducted by higher-level authorities. The response from his superiors was swift and unambiguous. Kehoe was ordered to revise his report, removing all references to unknown technology and extraterrestrial possibilities. The official conclusion would be that the witnesses had observed a natural phenomenon, possibly ball lightning or atmospheric plasma, that had caused temporary electromagnetic effects and been misidentified as structured craft. When Kehoe protested that this explanation contradicted the physical evidence and witness testimony, he was told that national security considerations required a conventional explanation, regardless of the facts. The final Project Blue Book report on the Levelland incident was released on December 15, 1957. It attributed all 15 sightings to ball lightning and electromagnetic effects associated with an unusual atmospheric disturbance. The physical evidence from Wright's field was dismissed as unrelated to the reported sightings. The radiation readings were explained as naturally occurring variations in background radiation levels. The consistency of witness testimony was attributed to suggestion and mass hysteria influenced by media coverage. The report satisfied no one. The witnesses knew it was false. The local investigators knew it was false. Even many within the Air Force knew it was false. But it served its purpose. It provided an official explanation that allowed the incident to be filed away and forgotten by the mainstream media and the general public. The Levelland UFO wave became just another debunked UFO story, interesting only to believers and conspiracy theorists. But for the people who'd lived through that November night in 1957, the official explanation changed nothing. They knew what they'd seen. They knew what they'd experienced. And they knew that something extraordinary had visited their small Texas town, something that challenged every assumption about humanity's place in the universe. The government might deny it, the media might forget it, and society might ridicule it, but the truth remained. On November 2nd, 1957, Levelland, Texas became the site of one of the most significant UFO encounters in history. The real question wasn't whether the incident had happened. The real question was why it had been covered up so thoroughly, and what other truths were being hidden from the American people. The first death threats arrived exactly 1 month after the incident. Jim Wheeler found the letter slipped under his front door on a cold December morning, typed on plain white paper with no signature or return address. The message was brief and chilling. Keep your mouth shut about what you think you saw, or you and your family will regret it. Wheeler had been receiving crank calls and hate mail since the story went national, but this felt different. This felt serious. This felt like someone with real power wanted the Levelland witnesses to disappear from public view permanently. Wheeler wasn't the only one being pressured into silence. Pedro Saucedo received a visit from 2 men in dark suits who claimed to be from the Federal Aviation Administration. They spent 3 hours in his living room, going over his story in excruciating detail, asking the same questions repeatedly, and making it clear that his continued cooperation with UFO investigators would be viewed as unpatriotic and possibly treasonous. When Saucedo asked to see their identification, they showed him credentials that looked official enough. But when he tried to verify their visit with the FAA regional office in Fort Worth, he was told that no such investigation was taking place. Deputy Pat McCulloch faced the most systematic campaign of intimidation. His personnel file was suddenly flagged for review, with investigators questioning every arrest he'd made, every report he'd filed, and every decision he'd made during his 8 years in law enforcement. Fellow officers who'd worked with him for years began treating him with suspicion and hostility. His requests for backup were delayed or ignored. His equipment malfunctioned regularly. The message was clear: either recant your UFO story or find another line of work. The pressure campaign was coordinated and professional, displaying a level of organization that went far beyond local law enforcement or military officials. Someone with significant resources and authority was working systematically to silence the Levelland witnesses, and that someone had access to personnel files, financial records, and the kind of institutional leverage that could destroy lives and careers with frightening efficiency. But the intimidation had an unexpected consequence. Instead of frightening the witnesses into silence, it convinced them that they'd stumbled onto something much bigger than a simple UFO sighting. If what they'd seen was just a weather phenomenon or experimental aircraft, why were they being threatened? Why was someone going to such elaborate lengths to discredit their accounts and destroy their credibility? The cover-up was becoming more compelling evidence than the original sighting. In January 1958, 5 of the Levelland witnesses received an invitation that would change their understanding of the incident completely. Dr. James McDonald, an atmospheric physicist from the University of Arizona, had been quietly investigating UFO reports across the Southwest for several years, and he'd become convinced that the Levelland case represented something unprecedented in the annals of aerial phenomena. McDonald wasn't a UFO believer or conspiracy theorist. He was a respected scientist with credentials from MIT and Harvard, and he was approaching the subject with the same methodical rigor he applied to his atmospheric research. McDonald had uncovered something that Major Kehoe's official investigation had missed or deliberately ignored. The Levelland incident hadn't occurred in isolation. On the same night, November 2nd, 1957, similar electromagnetic effects and unidentified object had been reported across a vast area of the American Southwest. Radar stations in New Mexico had tracked unknown objects moving at impossible speeds. A military convoy in Colorado had experienced complete radio failure when mysterious lights appeared overhead. Oil rig workers in Oklahoma had watched glowing objects hover over their drilling sites before shooting away at tremendous velocity. The pattern extended far beyond what had been reported in the media. McDonald had identified over 40 separate incidents that occurred within a 12-hour period on November 2nd and 3rd, 1957, stretching from West Texas to Colorado, from Oklahoma to New Mexico. All involved electromagnetic effects. All featured objects displaying flight characteristics beyond known technology. All had been either ignored by official investigators or explained away with increasingly implausible conventional theories. McDonald's research revealed that the Levelland witnesses had been part of something much larger than a local UFO flap. They'd been witnesses to what appeared to be a coordinated operation involving multiple craft conducting systematic reconnaissance across thousands of square miles of American territory. The implications were staggering. If McDonald's analysis was correct, then November 2nd, 1957 represented the largest UFO operation ever documented, a mass visitation that demonstrated technological capabilities and organizational coordination far beyond anything in human experience. The meeting with McDonald took place in a small conference room at the Levelland Public Library, chosen because it was one of the few places in town that wasn't being monitored by the various government agents who'd taken up residence since the incident. Jim Wheeler, Pedro Saucedo, Jose Alvarez, Deputy McCulloch, and Newell Wright gathered around a table covered with maps, photographs, and technical reports that painted a picture of their November night that was both more frightening and more wonderful than any of them had imagined. McDonald began by showing them a map of the Southwest with red pins marking every reported UFO incident on November 2nd and 3rd. The pins formed a rough grid pattern with concentrations around military bases, radar installations, and nuclear facilities. Levelland sat almost exactly at the center of this grid, suggesting that their small Texas town had been chosen as a coordination point for a much larger operation. The technical data was even more revealing. McDonald had obtained radar records from multiple installations through Freedom of Information Act requests, and the pattern they showed was unmistakable. Unknown objects had appeared simultaneously across hundreds of miles, moved in coordinated formations, and disappeared in perfect synchronization. The objects displayed flight characteristics that violated known laws of physics. Instantaneous acceleration, right-angle turns at tremendous speeds, and the ability to hover motionless for extended periods before shooting away faster than any known aircraft. Most disturbing of all was the electromagnetic data. McDonald had compiled reports of radio interference, power failures, and engine malfunctions from across the region, and they all followed the same pattern the Levelland witnesses had experienced. Complete electrical failure in the presence of the objects, immediate restoration when the objects departed, and no lasting damage to the affected equipment. This wasn't random interference or natural phenomenon. This was evidence of technology that could selectively disrupt human electrical systems while leaving its own operations unaffected. As McDonald laid out his evidence, the Levelland witnesses began to understand that they'd been chosen for something. They weren't random observers of a chance encounter. They were part of a deliberate demonstration, a coordinated revelation designed to show selected humans exactly what was sharing their skies. The question was why? Why had they been chosen? Why had their small town been selected as the focal point for such an elaborate display? And what did the beings behind this technology want from humanity? The answer to that question would come from an unexpected source. 3 days after the meeting with McDonald, Newell Wright made a discovery in his cotton field that would add an entirely new dimension to the Levelland story. Wright had been checking the area where the object had allegedly landed, partly out of curiosity and partly because the circular depression had become a tourist attraction that was damaging his crops. But on this particular morning, he found something that hadn't been there before. Partially buried in the center of the landing site was a metallic object about the size of a cigarette pack. The object was made of a material that looked like brushed aluminum, but felt unlike any metal Wright had ever handled. It was completely smooth, with no seams, joints, or manufacturing marks. When he picked it up, it was warm to the touch despite having been buried in cold ground, and it seemed to pulse with a faint vibration that he could feel in his fingertips. Wright called Dr. McDonald immediately, and within 6 hours, the physicist was back in Levelland with a team of graduate students and a van full of testing equipment. The object defied every attempt at analysis. X-rays revealed no internal structure. Spectrographic analysis couldn't identify the material composition. The object appeared to be solid throughout, yet it weighed far less than any known metal of equivalent size. Most puzzling of all, the object seemed to be generating its own electromagnetic field, creating a subtle but measurable distortion in radio signals and compass readings within a 10-foot radius. McDonald spent 3 weeks studying the object before reaching a conclusion that would end his academic career. In a report that was immediately classified by the Air Force and suppressed by the University of Arizona, McDonald stated that the Levelland artifact represented technology that was decades or centuries ahead of current human capabilities, and that its discovery proved beyond reasonable doubt that the November 2nd incident involved contact with non-human intelligence. The suppression of McDonald's report marked the beginning of the end for serious scientific investigation of the Levelland case. McDonald was stripped of his government research contracts, denied tenure at the university, and effectively blacklisted from the academic community. His graduate students were reassigned to other advisors. His laboratory was closed. His 20 years of respected atmospheric research was forgotten overnight, and he became a cautionary tale for any scientist who dared to take UFO reports seriously. The artifact itself disappeared from McDonald's laboratory 3 days before his report was scheduled for peer review. Security cameras showed 2 men in maintenance uniforms entering the building after hours, but the men couldn't be identified and no arrest was ever made. McDonald filed a theft report with local police, But the investigation was mysteriously dropped after federal authorities claimed the object had been national security materials that McDonald had possessed illegally. With McDonald discredited and the physical evidence confiscated, the official narrative of the Levelland incident was complete. The witnesses had been intimidated into silence. The scientific investigator had been destroyed professionally, and the physical proof had been eliminated. As far as the government and mainstream media were concerned, the Levelland UFO wave had never happened. It was a hoax, a misidentification, a mass hallucination that had been thoroughly debunked by serious investigation. But the truth had a way of surviving even the most systematic cover-up attempts. The Levelland witnesses might have been silenced, but they hadn't forgotten. McDonald might have been discredited, but his research notes had been quietly preserved by sympathetic colleagues. The artifact might have been confiscated, but detailed photographs and test results had been hidden away in private files. The evidence was scattered and suppressed, but it existed, waiting for someone brave enough to piece it together and tell the real story. That someone turned out to be an unlikely hero, a small-town newspaper editor named Sarah Martinez who'd been covering the Levelland story since the beginning and who'd noticed inconsistencies in the official narrative that didn't add up. Martinez had been a journalist for 15 years, and she developed an instinct for spotting cover-ups and official lies. The Levelland case set off every alarm bell in her professional experience, and she decided to risk her career to uncover the truth. Martinez's investigation would take her from the archives of Project Blue Book to the classified files of the CIA, from the abandoned laboratories of discredited scientists to the hidden testimonies of witnesses who'd been threatened into silence. What she discovered would prove that the Levelland UFO wave wasn't just a single incident in a small Texas town. It was part of a much larger pattern of contact, cover-up, and control that reached to the highest levels of government and the deepest secrets of human history. The real story of Levelland was just beginning. Sarah Martinez had been editor of the Levelland Herald for exactly 3 years when the UFO incident turned her quiet newspaper into the most important publication in Hockley County. Martinez wasn't supposed to be covering stories of this magnitude. The Herald was a weekly paper that typically focused on high school football scores, county fair results, and the occasional city council controversy. But when 15 of her neighbors reported identical encounters with impossible objects in the sky, Martinez knew she was looking at the biggest story of her career. What she didn't know was that pursuing that story would nearly cost her everything she'd worked to build and ultimately lead her to discoveries that would challenge her understanding of reality itself. Martinez's first clue that the official narrative was false came from her own newspaper's archives. As she reviewed her coverage of the November 2nd incident, she noticed something that Major Kehoe's investigation had overlooked or deliberately ignored. 3 months before the UFO wave, the Herald had published a small item about unusual military activity in the area. Convoys of unmarked trucks had been seen moving through the county at night, carrying what appeared to be scientific equipment toward a remote section of ranch land 30 miles northwest of town. The ranch belonged to Thomas Whitmore, a reclusive millionaire who'd purchased 40,000 acres of seemingly worthless scrubland in 1955. Local residents had assumed Whitmore was planning some kind of oil exploration or mineral survey, but no drilling equipment had ever appeared. Instead, witnesses reported seeing construction activity, aircraft landing and taking off from what appeared to be a private airstrip, and unusual lights in the sky above the property almost every night. Martinez drove out to the Whitmore Ranch in February 1958, 3 months after the UFO wave, hoping to find some connection between the military activity and the November sightings. What she found instead was an empty landscape that showed clear signs of recent abandonment. Buildings had been hastily demolished, leaving only concrete foundations and scattered debris. The airstrip had been covered with dirt and replanted with native grass, but the outline was still visible from the right angle. Most tellingly, the entire area showed elevated radiation readings on the Geiger counter she'd borrowed from the local hospital. But it was what she found buried in the debris field that changed everything. Half hidden under a pile of concrete rubble was a fragment of metal unlike anything she'd ever seen. The piece was roughly triangular, about 6 inches long, and made of the same mysterious material that Newell Wright had discovered in his cotton field. It was lightweight yet incredibly strong, warm to the touch, and seemed to vibrate with internal energy. When Martinez picked it up, she felt a strange, tingling sensation in her fingertips, and her watch stopped working permanently. Martinez wrapped the fragment in newspaper and took it to Dr. Richard Stevens, a metallurgist at Texas Tech University who'd been quietly studying unusual materials for the Air Force since 1952. Stevens was one of the few scientists who'd refused to dismiss the UFO phenomenon entirely, and he'd been following the Levelland case with intense professional interest. When Martinez showed him the fragment, Stevens' reaction confirmed her suspicions that she'd stumbled onto something extraordinary. Stevens spent 2 weeks analyzing the fragment using every test available to mid-1950s science. The results defied explanation. The material appeared to be a metallic alloy, but spectroscopic analysis couldn't identify any of the component elements. The atomic structure was unlike anything in the periodic table. The metal conducted electricity in ways that violated known laws of physics, sometimes acting as a perfect conductor and sometimes as a complete insulator, apparently responding to some external stimulus that Stevens couldn't identify. Most puzzling of all was the material's response to magnetic fields. When exposed to strong magnets, the fragment would become completely weightless, hovering several inches above Stevens' laboratory bench, as if gravity no longer affected it. The effect lasted exactly 17 minutes and 43 seconds, regardless of the strength of the magnetic field or the duration of exposure. After that precise interval, the fragment would gently settle back onto the bench, resuming its normal weight and properties. Stevens documented everything meticulously, creating a detailed report with photographs, test results, and theoretical analysis. But before he could submit his findings for peer review, he received a visit from the same type of men in dark suits who'd been intimidating the Levelland witnesses. The men identified themselves as Air Force security personnel and informed Stevens that his research involved classified materials that threatened national security. They confiscated all his notes, photographs, and test samples, and made it clear that any attempt to publish his findings would result in serious legal consequences. The fragment disappeared along with Stevens' research, but Martinez had anticipated this possibility. Before giving the material to Stevens, she'd photographed it extensively and taken detailed notes about its properties. She'd also filed the fragment with a sharp knife, creating several tiny slivers that she'd hidden in various locations around Levelland. When the government agents came for the original piece, they had no idea that samples still existed. Martinez's investigation was just beginning. Using her contacts in the newspaper industry, she began reaching out to editors across the Southwest, looking for similar stories that might have been suppressed or ignored. What she discovered was a pattern of UFO incidents that stretched back decades, all involving electromagnetic effects, all featuring objects with flight characteristics beyond known technology, and all followed by systematic cover-up efforts that silenced witnesses and destroyed evidence. The pattern was most evident in New Mexico, where a network of underground facilities had been constructed near Roswell, Los Alamos, and Alamogordo since the end of World War II. Local newspapers in these areas had reported unusual aerial activity throughout the 1940s and 1950s, but the stories had been consistently dismissed as classified military tests or weather phenomena. Witnesses who spoke publicly about their experiences faced the same intimidation campaigns that had silenced the Levelland observers. Martinez's most important discovery came through an unexpected source. While researching newspaper archives in Roswell, she was approached by Dr. Margaret Shun, a former Los Alamos physicist who'd been forced to resign from the Manhattan Project in 1947 after raising questions about unofficial research programs that seemed unrelated to nuclear weapons development. Shun had been blacklisted from government work and was now teaching high school chemistry, but she'd maintained contacts within the scientific community who'd been feeding her information about classified UFO research for over a decade. Shun revealed that the Levelland incident was part of what insiders called Operation Looking Glass, a systematic program to study and reverse engineer technology recovered from crashed UFO sites across the American Southwest. The program had been active since 1947, operating under such deep classification that most government officials had no knowledge of its existence. The November 2nd, 1957 UFO wave hadn't been a random visitation. It had been a coordinated effort by non-human intelligences to retrieve technology and personnel that had been captured during previous encounters. According to Chin sources, the Whitmore Ranch had been a front operation for Looking Glass research, disguised as a private agricultural venture, but actually housing a sophisticated laboratory where scientists attempted to understand and duplicate recovered alien technology. The facility had been operational for nearly 3 years before the November incident, during which time researchers had made significant progress in understanding the electromagnetic principles behind UFO propulsion systems. But their success had come at a price. The electromagnetic experiments had apparently created a beacon that attracted attention from the original owners of the technology. The November 2nd UFO wave was essentially a rescue mission, with multiple craft conducting coordinated reconnaissance to locate and recover their missing equipment and any personnel who might have been captured during previous crashes. The Levelland witnesses hadn't just observed a UFO flap. They'd been witnesses to what amounted to an alien military operation, carefully planned and flawlessly executed by intelligences that understood human technology and defensive capabilities far better than humans understood theirs. The systematic electromagnetic attacks on vehicles and infrastructure hadn't been random effects of exotic propulsion systems. They'd been deliberate demonstrations of superior technology, warnings to human military forces that resistance would be futile. Chen's revelations explained why the cover-up had been so thorough and so vicious. The Levelland incident had exposed the existence of Operation Looking Glass to public scrutiny, threatening a program that represented humanity's most important technological research since the Manhattan Project. The witnesses had to be silenced, not just to maintain the UFO secrecy, but to protect a classified operation that could determine whether human civilization survived the coming age of open contact with non-human intelligence. But Chen had more than just theoretical explanations to offer. She'd managed to preserve documentation from her time at Los Alamos, including photographs and technical specifications of recovered UFO materials that matched exactly what Martinez had found at the Whitmore Ranch. The fragments weren't random debris left behind by careless aliens. They were pieces of sophisticated technology that had been deliberately planted for human researchers to find, part of a carefully controlled program of technological transfer that had been ongoing for decades. The implications were staggering. Human technological advancement since 1947 hadn't been the result of natural scientific progress. It had been guided and accelerated by reverse engineering alien technology, creating developments in electronics, materials science, and aerospace engineering that would have taken centuries to achieve independently. Transistors, integrated circuits, fiber optics, ceramic composites, all had been developed with the assistance of recovered UFO technology. But the technological transfer came with strings attached. The alien intelligences weren't sharing their knowledge out of benevolence. They were preparing human civilization for something, gradually introducing concepts and capabilities that would be necessary for survival in a larger galactic community. The UFO incidents weren't random visitations by curious explorers. They were part of a systematic program of contact and preparation that had been ongoing since the end of World War II. Martinez spent 6 months documenting Chen's revelations, cross-referencing them with her own research and building a comprehensive picture of the real story behind the Levelland UFO wave. The evidence was overwhelming, but it was also incredibly dangerous. Publishing the truth would expose not just government cover-ups, but would reveal that human civilization was already under the influence of non-human intelligence in ways that most people couldn't imagine or accept. In August 1958, Martinez made the decision that would define the rest of her life. She would publish the complete story in a special edition of the Levelland Herald, regardless of the consequences to herself or her newspaper. The American people had a right to know the truth about what was happening in their skies and in their government laboratories. They had a right to understand that their world was already changing in ways that would reshape the future of human civilization. But 3 days before the planned publication date, Martinez's printing press was destroyed in a suspicious fire that also consumed her newspaper office, her research files, and nearly 20 years of Levelland Herald archives. The fire department ruled it an electrical accident, but Martinez knew better. Someone with serious resources and determination had decided that her story was too dangerous to tell. The message was clear. Some truths were too important to be left to journalists and small-town newspapers. Some secrets were protected by forces that wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who threatened to expose them. The real story of Levelland would remain hidden, buried beneath layers of official denial and systematic intimidation that had proven effective in silencing everyone who tried to tell the truth. But Martinez wasn't finished. The fire had destroyed her newspaper and her evidence, but it hadn't destroyed her determination to reveal what she'd learned. If she couldn't publish the story in Levelland, she'd find another way to get the truth to the American people. She'd find allies who shared her commitment to exposing the lies and cover-ups that were keeping humanity in the dark about its true place in the universe. The battle for the truth was just beginning, and Martinez was prepared to fight it for as long as necessary. The knock on Sarah Martinez's apartment door came at exactly 3:17 a.m. on a moonless September night in 1958. Martinez had been expecting it for weeks, ever since the fire that destroyed her newspaper office and research files. She'd moved into a small apartment above Henderson's hardware store in downtown Levelland, paying cash for 3 months' rent and using a false name on the lease. But she knew they'd find her eventually. They always found the people who asked too many questions about things that were supposed to remain secret. Through the peephole, Martinez could see 2 men in dark suits standing patiently in the hallway. They weren't trying to break down her door or sneak inside. They were simply waiting for her to answer, confident that she would cooperate once she understood the stakes involved. These weren't the local intimidation specialists who'd been harassing the UFO witnesses. These were professionals from Washington, and their presence meant that her investigation had attracted attention at the highest levels of government. Martinez opened the door and invited them inside. The older man introduced himself as Agent William Coleman from a government agency he declined to name. His partner remained silent throughout the conversation, taking notes in a small leather notebook, but never speaking or making eye contact. Coleman was polite, soft-spoken, and absolutely terrifying in his quiet certainty that he could make Martinez disappear without a trace if she refused to cooperate. The conversation lasted exactly 43 minutes, and it changed Martinez's understanding of her situation completely. Coleman wasn't there to threaten her or demand that she stop her investigation. He was there to recruit her. The agency he represented had been monitoring her research into the Levelland incident, and they were impressed by her thoroughness, her discretion, and her ability to uncover information that had been carefully hidden for over a decade. Coleman explained that the UFO phenomenon was real, that contact with non-human intelligence had been ongoing since 1947, and that a small group of government insiders had been managing the situation without public knowledge or oversight from elected officials. The cover-up wasn't a conspiracy to hide the truth from the American people. It was a carefully orchestrated program to prevent mass panic, while human civilization was gradually prepared for open contact with a galactic community that had been observing Earth for thousands of years. Martinez's investigation had uncovered pieces of a much larger puzzle that included crashed UFO recoveries, reverse engineering programs, and controlled technological transfer designed to accelerate human development. But what she didn't know was that the entire process was being managed by human collaborators who'd been in direct communication with alien representatives since the early 1950s. The Levelland incident hadn't been an unauthorized alien operation. It had been a carefully planned joint exercise designed to test human responses to mass UFO encounters. Coleman offered Martinez a choice that would determine the course of her remaining life. She could continue her investigation as an independent journalist, facing escalating intimidation and eventual elimination when she got too close to the most sensitive information. Or she could join the agency's information management team, helping to control the gradual disclosure of UFO reality while ensuring that the transition to open contact proceeded smoothly without triggering societal collapse. The offer was seductive in its apparent reasonableness. Martinez would have access to classified information that would answer all her questions about the UFO phenomenon. She'd be working with dedicated professionals who shared her commitment to truth, even if they disagreed about the proper timing and methods for revealing that truth to the public. She'd be inside the system, helping to shape policy rather than fighting it from the outside. But Martinez had spent too many years as a journalist to trust government officials who claimed they were protecting the public by lying to them. She declined Coleman's offer politely but firmly, explaining that her obligation was to the readers of her newspaper, not to shadowy government agencies that operated without accountability or oversight. Coleman accepted her decision with apparent understanding, but his final words carried an unmistakable warning. "I hope you understand the consequences of the path you've chosen, Miss Martinez. Some truths are too dangerous to be revealed prematurely." 2 days after Coleman's visit, Martinez received an envelope containing photographs and documents that proved her investigation had been more successful than she'd realized. The materials had been left on her doorstep by someone who clearly had access to the highest levels of classified information about UFO research and recovery operations. The photographs showed crashed UFO sites, alien bodies being examined by military personnel, and sophisticated technology being reverse-engineered in underground laboratories across the Southwest. But the most significant document was a memorandum dated November 15, 1957, just 2 weeks after the Levelland incident. The memo was addressed to President Eisenhower from a group calling itself the Majestic 12, and it detailed the results of what they termed Operation Looking Glass Phase 3. The Levelland UFO wave had been the third in a series of coordinated exercises designed to measure human technological capabilities and social responses to mass UFO encounters. According to the memo, the alien intelligences were operating under a formal agreement with the United States government that had been negotiated in 1954 at a secret meeting at Edwards Air Force Base. The agreement allowed limited alien research operations on Earth in exchange for technological information that would accelerate human development. The UFO incidents that had been reported across the country since 1947 weren't random visitations. They were part of a carefully managed program of graduated contact designed to prepare human civilization for membership in a galactic confederation. The memo revealed that the Levelland witnesses had been specifically selected for their psychological profiles and community standing. Their reports would be credible enough to influence public opinion while being limited enough to avoid mass panic. The electromagnetic effects demonstrated during the incident were intended to show human military leaders that resistance to alien technology would be futile, while the systematic cover-up that followed would demonstrate the government's ability to control information about the contact program. Martinez realized that she'd been investigating only the visible surface of a much deeper and more complex situation. The UFO cover-up wasn't a conspiracy to hide alien visitation. It was a management strategy for controlled disclosure that had been planned and implemented by humans working in cooperation with non-human intelligence. The witnesses hadn't been silenced to protect government secrets. They'd been silenced to maintain the carefully orchestrated timeline for revealing UFO reality to the public. But the documents also revealed something that Coleman hadn't mentioned during his recruitment pitch. The alien agreement wasn't as beneficial to humanity as the collaborators believed. The technological transfer was creating dependencies that would make human civilization increasingly vulnerable to alien control. The gradual disclosure program was designed not to prepare humans for equal membership in a galactic community, but to condition them for subordinate status in a colonial relationship. The evidence was scattered throughout the classified files. Unexplained livestock mutilations that were actually genetic sampling operations, mass abduction programs that were creating a hybrid population under alien control, and underground facilities where human subjects were being used for biological experiments that violated every principle of medical ethics and human rights. The Majestic 12 believed they were managing a beneficial contact program, but they were actually facilitating the gradual conquest of human civilization. Martinez spent 3 weeks analyzing the documents and cross-referencing them with her previous research. The picture that emerged was terrifying in its implications. The UFO phenomenon wasn't just about alien visitation or government cover-ups. It was about the systematic transformation of human civilization under the guidance of non-human intelligence that viewed humans as a useful but inferior species suitable for controlled exploitation. The Levelland incident took on an entirely different meaning in this context. The witnesses hadn't just observed a UFO flap. They'd been participants in a psychological operation designed to test human responses to alien displays of technological superiority. Their experiences had been carefully calibrated to produce maximum impact while maintaining plausible deniability, and their subsequent silencing had been part of a larger strategy to control the flow of information about the ongoing contact program. Martinez made copies of all the documents and hid them in multiple locations across Texas and New Mexico. She knew that publishing the information would make her a target for elimination, but she also knew that someone had to warn the American people about what was being done to their civilization without their knowledge or consent. The truth was too important to be left to government collaborators who'd been compromised by their alien contacts. But before she could arrange for publication, Martinez made a discovery that changed everything she thought she knew about the situation. Hidden in the final pages of the Majestic 12 memo was a reference to something called Project Blue Rose, a psychological operation designed to discredit legitimate UFO researchers by feeding them false information that would make them appear delusional when they try to publish their findings. Martinez realized with growing horror that she might be a victim of Blue Rose herself. The documents could be sophisticated forgeries designed to make her publish false information that would destroy her credibility and discredit the entire UFO research community. The photographs could be stage scenes created with special effects and professional actors. Even her contacts with Dr. Chun and Agent Coleman could be part of an elaborate psychological operation designed to manipulate her into serving the cover-up rather than exposing it. The paranoia was intentional and effective. By questioning the authenticity of every piece of evidence she'd collected, Martinez was paralyzed by uncertainty about what was real and what was disinformation. She couldn't publish information that might be false, but she couldn't ignore evidence that might reveal the most important story in human history. The psychological operation was designed to create exactly this kind of paralysis, neutralizing potential threats by drowning them in confusion and self-doubt. Martinez spent the winter of 1958 trying to verify the authenticity of the documents through independent sources, but every lead she followed seemed to circle back to the same network of government insiders and alien collaborators who might be feeding her false information. The truth was hidden beneath so many layers of secrecy, disinformation, and misdirection that she began to wonder if anyone really knew what was happening anymore. By spring 1959, Martinez had reached a conclusion that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The real UFO cover-up wasn't about hiding alien visitation from the public. It was about hiding the fact that no one, not even the supposed experts and insiders, really understood what the alien intelligence wanted or how their contact program would ultimately affect human civilization. The government collaborators were making decisions about humanity's future based on incomplete information and wishful thinking, while the alien intelligence maintained complete control over the flow of information and the pace of disclosure. The Levelland witnesses had seen something real that November night in 1957, but the meaning of their experience remained hidden beneath layers of speculation, disinformation, and deliberate confusion. They'd been participants in something much larger than a simple UFO sighting, but exactly what they participated in was a question that might never be answered. Martinez made one final decision about her investigation. She would preserve everything she'd learned in a detailed account that would be sealed and hidden until such time as the truth could be safely revealed. Future researchers would need access to her findings when the time came for genuine disclosure, but that time was clearly not now. The forces arrayed against the truth were too powerful, too sophisticated, and too well organized for a single journalist to overcome. She spent 6 months writing a comprehensive account of her investigation, documenting everything from her first interview with the Levelland witnesses to her final analysis of the Majestic 12 documents. The account filled over 300 pages with photographs, documents, maps, and detailed analysis that painted the most complete picture of the UFO phenomenon that had ever been assembled by a private researcher. Martinez sealed the account in a waterproof container and buried it in a location known only to her, leaving detailed instructions for its recovery in a safety deposit box that would be opened only after her death. The truth about Levelland would survive, even if she didn't, waiting for a time when humanity was ready to confront the reality of its situation without the protective filters of government management and alien manipulation. On December 7th, 1959, exactly 2 years after she'd begun her investigation, Sarah Martinez disappeared. Her apartment was found undisturbed. Her car was still parked outside Henderson's hardware store, and her personal effects showed no signs of struggle or hasty departure. She simply vanished, leaving behind only questions and a hidden account that would remain buried for decades, waiting for someone brave enough to dig up the truth about what really happened in Levelland, Texas on that November night when the impossible became undeniably real. 50 years after Sarah Martinez disappeared, her safety deposit box was finally opened by her designated executor, a law firm in Amarillo that had been holding the key since 1959. The contents of the box led treasure hunters and researchers to a remote canyon 30 miles west of Levelland, where they discovered the waterproof container exactly where Martinez had buried it. Inside was her complete account of the UFO incident and its aftermath, along with copies of documents and photographs that had never been seen by the public. But the most significant discovery was a final letter that Martinez had written just days before her disappearance. A letter that revealed the ultimate truth about what had happened to the Levelland witnesses and why their story had been so thoroughly suppressed. The letter dated November 15th, 1957, just 2 weeks after the Levelland incident. The memo was addressed to President Eisenhower from a group calling itself the Majestic 12, and it detailed the results of what they termed Operation Looking Glass Phase 3. The Levelland UFO wave had been the third in a series of coordinated exercises designed to measure human technological capabilities and social responses to mass UFO encounters. According to the memo, the alien intelligences were operating under a formal agreement with the United States government that had been negotiated in 1954 at a secret meeting at Edwards Air Force Base. The agreement allowed limited alien research operations on Earth in exchange for technological information that would accelerate human development. The UFO incidents that had been reported across the country since 1947 weren't random visitations. They were part of a carefully managed program of graduated contact designed to prepare human civilization for membership in a galactic confederation. The memo revealed that the Levelland witnesses had been specifically selected for their psychological profiles and community standing. Their reports would be credible enough to influence public opinion while being limited enough to avoid mass panic. The electromagnetic effects demonstrated during the incident were intended to show human military leaders that resistance to alien technology would be futile, while the systematic cover-up that followed would demonstrate the government's ability to control information about the contact program. Martinez realized that she'd been investigating only the visible surface of a much deeper and more complex situation. The UFO cover-up wasn't a conspiracy to hide alien visitation. It was a management strategy for controlled disclosure that had been planned and implemented by humans working in cooperation with non-human intelligence. The witnesses hadn't been silenced to protect government secrets. They'd been silenced to maintain the carefully orchestrated timeline for revealing UFO reality to the public. But the documents also revealed something that Coleman hadn't mentioned during his recruitment pitch. The alien agreement wasn't as beneficial to humanity as the collaborators believed. The technological transfer was creating dependencies that would make human civilization increasingly vulnerable to alien control. The gradual disclosure program was designed not to prepare humans for equal membership in a galactic community, but to condition them for subordinate status in a colonial relationship. The evidence was scattered throughout the classified files, unexplained livestock mutilations that were actually genetic sampling operations, mass abduction programs that were creating a hybrid population under alien control, and underground facilities where human subjects were being used for biological experiments that violated every principle of medical ethics and human rights. The Majestic 12 believed they were managing a beneficial contact program, but they were actually facilitating the gradual conquest of human civilization. Martinez spent 3 weeks analyzing the documents and cross-referencing them with her previous research. The picture that emerged was terrifying in its implications. The UFO phenomenon wasn't just about alien visitation or government cover-ups. It was about the systematic transformation of human civilization under the guidance of non-human intelligence that viewed humans as a useful but inferior species suitable for controlled exploitation. The Levelland incident took on an entirely different meaning in this context. The witnesses hadn't just observed a UFO flap. They'd been participants in a psychological operation designed to test human responses to alien displays of technological superiority. Their experiences had been carefully calibrated to produce maximum impact while maintaining plausible deniability, and their subsequent silencing had been part of a larger strategy to control the flow of information about the ongoing contact program. Martinez made copies of all the documents and hid them in multiple locations across Texas and New Mexico. She knew that publishing the information would make her a target for elimination, but she also knew that someone had to warn the American people about what was being done to their civilization without their knowledge or consent. The truth was too important to be left to government collaborators who'd been compromised by their alien contacts. But before she could arrange for publication, Martinez made a discovery that changed everything she thought she knew about the situation. Hidden in the final pages of the Majestic 12 memo was a reference to something called Project Blue Rose, a psychological operation designed to discredit legitimate UFO researchers by feeding them false information that would make them appear delusional when they try to publish their findings. Martinez realized with growing horror that she might be a victim of Blue Rose herself. The documents could be sophisticated forgeries designed to make her publish false information that would destroy her credibility and discredit the entire UFO research community. The photographs could be stage scenes created with special effects and professional actors. Even her contacts with Dr. Chun and Agent Coleman could be part of an elaborate psychological operation designed to manipulate her into serving the cover-up rather than exposing it. The paranoia was intentional and effective. By questioning the authenticity of every piece of evidence she'd collected, Martinez was paralyzed by uncertainty about what was real and what was disinformation. She couldn't publish information that might be false, but she couldn't ignore evidence that might reveal the most important story in human history. The psychological operation was designed to create exactly this kind of paralysis, neutralizing potential threats by drowning them in confusion and self-doubt. Martinez spent the winter of 1958 trying to verify the authenticity of the documents through independent sources, but every lead she followed seemed to circle back to the same network of government insiders and alien collaborators who might be feeding her false information. The truth was hidden beneath so many layers of secrecy, disinformation, and misdirection that she began to wonder if anyone really knew what was happening anymore. By spring 1959, Martinez had reached a conclusion that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The real UFO cover-up wasn't about hiding alien visitation from the public. It was about hiding the fact that no one, not even the supposed experts and insiders, really understood what the alien intelligence wanted or how their contact program would ultimately affect human civilization. The government collaborators were making decisions about humanity's future based on incomplete information and wishful thinking, while the alien intelligence maintained complete control over the flow of information and the pace of disclosure. The Levelland witnesses had seen something real that November night in 1957, but the meaning of their experience remained hidden beneath layers of speculation, disinformation, and deliberate confusion. They'd been participants in something much larger than a simple UFO sighting, but exactly what they participated in was a question that might never be answered. Martinez made one final decision about her investigation. She would preserve everything she'd learned in a detailed account that would be sealed, and hidden until such time as the truth could be safely revealed. Future researchers would need access to her findings when the time came for genuine disclosure, but that time was clearly not now. The forces arrayed against the truth were too powerful, too sophisticated, and too well organized for a single journalist to overcome. She spent 6 months writing a comprehensive account of her investigation, documenting everything from her first interview with the Levelland witnesses to her final analysis of the Majestic 12 documents. The account filled over 300 pages with photographs, documents, maps, and detailed analysis that painted the most complete picture of the UFO phenomenon that had ever been assembled by a private researcher. Martinez sealed the account in a waterproof container and buried it in a location known only to her, leaving detailed instructions for its recovery in a safety deposit box that would be opened only after her death. The truth about Levelland would survive, even if she didn't, waiting for a time when humanity was ready to confront the reality of its situation without the protective filters of government management and alien manipulation. On December 7, 1959, exactly 2 years after she'd begun her investigation, Sarah Martinez disappeared. Her apartment was found undisturbed. Her car was still parked outside Henderson's hardware store, and her personal effects showed no signs of struggle or hasty departure. She simply vanished, leaving behind only questions and a hidden account that would remain buried for decades, waiting for someone brave enough to dig up the truth about what really happened in Levelland, Texas on that November night when the impossible became undeniably real. 50 years after Sarah Martinez disappeared, her safety deposit box was finally opened by her designated executor, a law firm in Amarillo that had been holding the key since 1959. The contents of the box led treasure hunters and researchers to a remote canyon 30 miles west of Levelland, where they discovered the waterproof container exactly where Martinez had buried it. Inside was her complete account of the UFO incident and its aftermath, along with copies of documents and photographs that had never been seen by the public. But the most significant discovery was a final letter that Martinez had written just days before her disappearance. A letter that revealed the ultimate truth about what had happened to the Levelland witnesses and why their story had been so thoroughly suppressed. The letter began with a confession that changed everything researchers thought they knew about the case. Martinez revealed that she'd never actually disappeared in 1959. She'd been recruited by the same agency that Agent Coleman represented, but not as an information manager or disinformation specialist. She'd been brought into a much more secret program, one that existed independently of both the government collaborators and the Alien Contact Initiative. This program, known only as the Watchers, consisted of human observers who monitored the alien government collaboration while maintaining complete independence from both sides. The Watchers had been established in 1948 by a group of military officers and scientists who'd become convinced that the official contact program was proceeding without adequate safeguards for human autonomy and survival. While the Majestic 12 believed they were negotiating beneficial agreements with alien representatives, the Watchers suspected that humanity was being systematically deceived and manipulated by intelligences whose true agenda remained hidden beneath layers of diplomatic protocol and technological gifts. Martinez's recruitment into the Watchers had been the real purpose of her investigation. Her work as a journalist had been a cover for gathering intelligence about the contact program, and her apparent disappearance had been staged to protect her while she continued her research from within the shadow organization. For 50 years, she'd been documenting the true progress of human-alien interaction, compiling evidence that would support humanity's case if the relationship ever became openly adversarial. The letter revealed that the Levelland witnesses had been more important to the overall contact program than anyone had realized. They hadn't been randomly selected observers of a demonstration. They'd been specifically chosen because their psychological profiles indicated they would resist alien mental influence more effectively than most humans. The November 2nd incident had been designed not just to display alien technology, but to identify humans who possessed natural immunity to the psychological conditioning that accompanied most UFO encounters. This immunity made the Levelland witnesses dangerous to the alien agenda, but it also made them valuable to the Watchers. Over the decades following the incident, the Watchers had maintained discreet contact with the survivors, monitoring their health and mental state while protecting them from both government intimidation and alien retaliation. What they discovered was that the witnesses had developed enhanced cognitive abilities and resistance to various forms of psychological manipulation, suggesting that their exposure to alien technology had triggered beneficial genetic mutations. Pedro Saucedo, the first witness to report the incident, had become a successful inventor whose patents included several breakthrough technologies in electromagnetic propulsion and energy storage. He'd never connected his innovations to his UFO experience, believing them to be products of natural creativity and hard work. But analysis by Watcher scientists revealed that his inventions incorporated principles that were decades ahead of conventional human science, suggesting that his encounter with alien technology had implanted knowledge that emerged gradually through his subconscious mind. Jim Wheeler, the respected rancher whose testimony had given credibility to the entire incident, had developed an uncanny ability to predict weather patterns and natural disasters with accuracy that amazed his neighbors and baffled meteorologists. Wheeler attributed his abilities to a lifetime of observing the Texas sky, but Watcher's documentation showed that his predictions often involved events that couldn't be forecast using conventional methods. His enhanced intuition appeared to be the result of direct mental contact with an alien intelligence network that monitored global environmental conditions. Deputy Pat McCulloch, who'd observed the UFO at close range, had left law enforcement and become a successful businessman whose companies consistently outperformed their competitors through seemingly lucky timing and inspired strategic decisions. McCulloch's business success was actually the result of enhanced pattern recognition abilities that allowed him to perceive market trends and social changes before they became apparent to conventional analysis. Like the other witnesses, he was unaware that his UFO encounter had fundamentally altered his cognitive capabilities. The pattern held true for all 15 Levelland witnesses. Each had developed enhanced abilities that made them more successful, more intuitive, and more resistant to various forms of psychological manipulation than they'd been before their encounter. But they'd also become targets for ongoing alien monitoring and occasional intervention designed to prevent them from recognizing the source of their enhanced capabilities or sharing their knowledge with other humans. Martinez's letter revealed that the alien contact program wasn't primarily about technology transfer or diplomatic negotiation. It was about genetic modification, creating a hybrid human population that would serve as intermediaries between alien intelligence and ordinary humanity when open contact finally occurred. The electromagnetic effects that characterized UFO encounters weren't side effects of exotic propulsion systems. They were deliberate genetic modification tools that triggered dormant capabilities in human DNA, creating enhanced individuals who could eventually function as administrators and interpreters in an alien-controlled world. The Levelland incident had been one of thousands of similar operations conducted across the globe since 1947, each designed to identify and modify humans with specific genetic markers that made them suitable for enhancement. The victims weren't random. They were carefully selected members of bloodlines that possessed latent abilities that could be activated through exposure to alien technology. The UFO phenomenon wasn't about visitation or exploration. It was about the systematic harvesting and modification of human genetic material to create a compliant administrative class. But the Watchers had discovered something that the alien planners hadn't anticipated. The genetic modifications could be reversed or redirected through specific frequencies of electromagnetic radiation that disrupted the alien programming while preserving the enhanced abilities. Over 50 years, the Watchers had developed technology that could free enhanced humans from alien control while allowing them to retain their improved cognitive capabilities. Martinez's final revelation was that the Watchers were preparing for open resistance to the alien agenda. They'd identified and contacted thousands of enhanced humans worldwide, offering them the opportunity to join a network of individuals who possessed alien-enhanced abilities but remained completely independent of alien control. The network was preparing for the day when the alien presence would be revealed to the general public, ensuring that humanity would have advocates who couldn't be manipulated or controlled by alien psychological techniques. The Levelland witnesses had become leaders in this resistance network, using their enhanced abilities to identify other modified humans and develop countermeasures to alien technology and psychological control methods. Their quiet town had become the secret headquarters for humanity's most important defense against alien manipulation, hidden beneath the facade of ordinary small-town life in rural Texas. Pedro Saucedo's electromagnetic inventions weren't just commercial products. They were components of a planetary defense grid that could disrupt alien technology and communications when activated. Jim Wheeler's weather prediction abilities allowed the Watchers to anticipate and counter alien environmental manipulation programs. Deputy McCulloch's business network provided cover for Watchers' operations and funding for resistance research. The cover-up of the Levelland incident hadn't been designed to hide alien visitation from the public. It had been designed to hide the emergence of enhanced humans who could resist alien control and potentially threaten the entire contact program. The government collaborators had unknowingly assisted the alien agenda by suppressing evidence of human enhancement and preventing enhanced individuals from recognizing their abilities or connecting with each other. Martinez's letter concluded with instructions for activating the resistance network and specific protocols for revealing the truth about alien manipulation to the general public. She'd spent 50 years documenting alien operations and human responses, building a case that would support humanity's declaration of independence from alien oversight and control. The evidence was hidden in locations across the globe, waiting for the signal that would trigger coordinated resistance to the alien agenda. The signal came on the 50th anniversary of the Levelland incident, November 2, 2007, when enhanced humans around the world began experiencing simultaneous visions of alien installations and hybrid breeding programs that had been hidden from public awareness. The visions were triggered by activation of dormant genetic programming that the Watchers had inserted into the alien modification process, allowing enhanced humans to see through the psychological barriers that had hidden the true scope of alien operations on Earth. What they saw was terrifying in its scope and implications. Underground facilities on every continent where human subjects were being used for genetic experiments and hybrid breeding programs. Orbital stations where alien scientists monitored human development and directed social engineering programs designed to prepare humanity for subordinate status. Underwater bases where crashed human aircraft and their occupants were being reverse-engineered to understand human technology and psychology. But the visions also revealed hope. Thousands of enhanced humans were awakening to their true nature and potential, connecting with each other through telepathic networks that couldn't be monitored or controlled by alien technology. The resistance that Martinez and the Watchers had spent 50 years building was finally ready to reveal itself and challenge the alien presence on Earth. Today, visitors to Levelland, Texas find a quiet farming community that shows little evidence of its role in one of the most significant events in human history. The witnesses have aged or passed away, taking their secrets with them to their graves. The physical evidence has been destroyed or confiscated. The official records have been classified or destroyed. But beneath the surface, the legacy of that November night in 1957 continues to unfold. The Levelland UFO wave wasn't just a historical incident. It was the beginning of humanity's awakening to its true situation and potential in a universe where it was no longer alone. The witnesses didn't just see alien spacecraft. They became the first humans to demonstrate that alien control could be resisted and that humanity could develop its own enhanced capabilities without surrendering its autonomy to non-human intelligence. Their story continues today in the enhanced humans who walk among us, using abilities they don't fully understand to protect a species that doesn't know it needs protection. The real UFO cover-up isn't about hiding alien visitation. It's about hiding humanity's potential to transcend its current limitations and take its place as an independent force in a galactic community that has assumed human civilization would remain permanently subordinate to alien guidance. The truth about Levelland is still unfolding, still revealing new layers of meaning and implication that challenge everything we think we know about humanity's past, present, and future. The witnesses saw more than they realized, experienced more than they understood, and became more than they ever imagined possible. Their legacy is written not in books or government files, but in the enhanced humans who carry their genetic modifications forward into an uncertain future where the ultimate outcome of human-alien interaction remains to be determined. As you drift off to sleep tonight, remember that the sky above your bed has been witness to events that have shaped the course of human history in ways you've never imagined. The Levelland UFO wave was just the beginning of a story that continues to unfold around us every day, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment when humanity is finally ready to confront the truth about its place in a universe that is far stranger and more dangerous than we've ever been allowed to believe. The witnesses of Levelland showed us that ordinary people can experience extraordinary things and emerge transformed by encounters that challenge the very foundations of reality. Their courage in reporting what they saw, despite the personal cost, created a legacy that may ultimately determine whether human civilization survives and thrives as an independent force in the cosmos, or remains forever under the subtle control of intelligences that view humanity as a useful but subordinate species in their larger cosmic agenda. The choice, as it has always been, remains ours to make. But thanks to the witnesses of Levelland, we now have the tools and knowledge necessary to make that choice as an informed and enhanced species capable of determining its own destiny among the stars. Sleep well, knowing that the truth is stranger and more hopeful than you ever dared to imagine.